My first 10 years were a crash course in the realism about life. They festooned the town with loudspeakers, and in the morning there were trials, in the afternoon executions. We were there during the first 2 years of the Reign of Terror. The questions I've spent my lifetime wrestling with have never been more urgent than right now. We're at a civilizational moment. Our foundational inspiration, our original dynamism is gone. We've lost it. Like all the other civilizations that have come and gone before us, renewal lies beyond what could ever be achieved through political action, economics, or even institutional reform alone. We, on an individual level, will all need to engage with the urgency of the moment.
So everybody talks about this. Western civilization is unraveling. But have you ever wondered why? Why the ideas that once shaped freedom and prosperity and justice now feel rejected? I mean, what happens when a society loses its moral and spiritual compass to the point where it doesn't even seem like it can ever be restored? So here's where we are. Wokeism is rising, meaning feels scarce, truth itself is questioned, everything is social construction, and we really wonder if there's a way forward. Well, this is the right show for asking those kinds of questions, because when I have questions like this, I just call up people who are really smart and ask them. And then I record it so that you can watch as well. And that's what we're going to be doing today. We're going to be talking about a brand new documentary entitled Truth Rising. And my guest is John Stonestreet. You know John is the president of the Colson Center for Christian Worldview. He's a sought-after author and speaker in areas of faith and culture, worldview and education and apologetics. John is a Summit Ministries instructor and has been part of the Summit community for a long, long time, but you know him as the daily voice of Breakpoint, the syndicated commentary on culture that was founded by Chuck Colson. He's also the voice of The Point, which is a daily 1-minute feature on worldview, apologetics, and cultural issues. The documentary that his team put together, Truth Rising, is something that you're going to want to know about for your conversations in church, your small group, in Sunday school, with your neighbors, because it may actually be possible that civilization could be saved through the principles that we learn in Scripture and spreading the message of the gospel of Jesus Christ. So let's talk about it. Please welcome our guest. John, thanks for coming on the show.
Yeah, it's great to be here, as always.
I love conversations with you on this show more than just about any of the others, because you seem to have so much insight into the cultural moment that we're a part of. And that idea of the cultural moment, the civilizational moment, has become central to the work that you are doing through the Colson Center in conjunction with Focus on the Family. You've got this new course that's taken off like a rocket called Truth Rising. Talk a little bit about what the course is, just so people can orient to it. And then I got a lot of questions about why it's...
Well, it's a documentary and a study, and the documentary really describes that the cultural moment is a civilizational moment. And as you know, I don't have any new thoughts. I just regurgitate all smart people. And Os Guinness is one of those guys that's come to really mean a lot to me. We've been using that phrase cultural moment around the Colson Center for a long time, just that God's called us to a particular time and particular place in history. It's a theme that emerges throughout Scripture, I think is highlighted on Mars Hill when Paul's talking to the Athenians, the Epicurean and Stoics, and he says, God determines the exact times we live in the boundaries of our dwelling place. Well, as followers of Christ, we believe then that kind of implies something about calling. But then when you think about it on a civilizational level and you remember, oh yeah, civilizations, those are things we think about in history, right? We don't talk about this civilization. We talk about the ones that have died, because civilizations tend to die. Well, how's ours going to be any different? And how do we know that we're at some sort of critical moment? That's what Oz is really bringing to this concept of a civilizational moment. I mean, there's been a lot of predictions. Francis Schaeffer, Chuck Colson, you could go to the sociologists like Batiram Sorokin and others, who talk about kind of these essential aspects of civilization that make all the difference in, whether they survive and live and die and things like that. But what is it like to be in the middle of such a critical moment? That's what we're really wrestling with the documentary. The study is the second part of this, which really kind of wrestles with the question that Francis Schaeffer asked, how then shall we live? Chuck Colson and Nancy Pearcey, how now shall we live? I joked that we wanted to call it something like that, but there were no more adverbs to use. We were, it's kind of like, so we'll just go with Truth Rising. But the idea is how do we have an applied Christian worldview that's not just theoretical and theological, but actual and practical. And that's really what that is. Because I think what it means to be called to a civilizational moment is to be deeply grounded in truth and courageous. But that doesn't come out of nowhere, right? That has to be cultivated and catechized, and that's what this program's really about.
Yeah, that's right. Well, civilizations, people talk about the rise and fall of civilizations all of the time. And it's very difficult. Historians don't find this too easy to go back and figure out what actually constituted a civilization. What are the criteria by which we would call something a civilization? And, according to the most common criteria, you wouldn't have more than 15 to 20 civilizations in all of human history.
That's right. And never one as big and as powerful and as sweeping and as influential as the West.
As what we call the West or Western civilization. So before we dive in a little bit more, just explain that.
Well, listen, civilizations, when you look back in ancient times, it wasn't in the Western world, it wasn't in Europe, it wasn't in England. But here you have in the New World, this unexpected source of the most kind of powerful, overreaching, influential, when you think that every aspect of the globe essentially at some level is shaped or even defined by the West right now. And there's never been a civilization like that. And there's also never been a civilization in which the individual has had as much value, has had as much freedom. I'm not saying we got it all right. I'm not saying there were never controversies or we didn't have a history of enslaving people and that sort of thing. But there's nothing like the West in terms of the lifting of the human condition, the expansion of resources, the opportunity, freedom, and human dignity. Mm-hmm. Human dignity is not even a concept in most civilizations in the history of the West. The West innovates this. It comes from a very specific source. One of the points that we're making in the Truth Rising documentary in the first half, in which Oz really lays this out and he talks to some of the smartest people on the planet right now. Literally the guy like Neil Ferguson who wrote the book called Civilizations, like he's kind of the expert right now. But Ayaan Hirsi Ali and John Howard and others, what they point to is that the ideas and the things that animated the West have been cut off. It's like cutting a flower off from the roots. Mm-hmm. The flower will still look good for a while, but then it withers and dies. And what is the future of the civilizations that we read about in history? It's either death by revolution or fading away, or some version of both. The renewal of a civilization is very, very, very rare. But that's another possible path we can go down. But really, the most likely thing is withering and dying. And people are, pointing to all kinds of things today: debt, low birth rates, the climate crisis, or whatever. Whether they're right or wrong at what they're pointing to, the agreement is that we're in trouble. Yeah, because they're pointing to these realities of being cut off from the roots.
Yeah, that metaphor of the cut flower civilization has really taken off. A lot of people are using that. Oz, for those who are regular viewers or listeners to this show, remember that we had him on a couple of weeks ago, and he talked about that idea a little bit. It's interesting because, I'm fascinated, and you've known this, with Piotr Sorokin, who was probably the dominant founder of the field of sociology, at least civilizational sociology in the United States of America, first at the University of Minnesota, then at Harvard University. And I don't want to nerd out on this too much because we can get into nerd talk real easily, but he said cultures become sensate. Mm-hmm. And what he meant by that is sort of like if you quit working, but you still have a bank account and you take your ATM card and you go to the ATM machine and you can get some money out. And then you go back again, you get some money out. But if nothing more is being added, eventually you're going to get an insufficient funds notice. That's what he thought happened when civilizations died. What I'm wondering now, if there are people whose goal is to give it a good hard shove, like somebody who grabs the card from you, takes all of the money out of your account, and then gives the card back to you.
Right. I mean, listen, there's a lot of examples of that. I don't know that there's ever been a civilization where the dissenters to the civilization were given such a megaphone and university, endowed chairs and power. You certainly don't have that when you have ethnocentric civilizations, right? Where to kind of, critique from the inside was an act of more than just disobedience. It was an act of war. I mean, we do basically give, but kind of platform and voice to these people. But Sorokin's, main point was basically are you building for the future? Or are you living for the moment? And what's adding fuel to that fire is this narrative that the West has been the worst thing that's ever happened to the world, and rather than the source of good that it has been. And we have a lot more ways of spending down the resources of a particular society. And, in the film, Oz and I are driving around in this super cool old truck leaving D.C. I wish it were my truck. It's not. But he uses this line where he talks about the death of a civilization and likens it to how I think Emily Dickinson talked about old age. But he's referring to maybe Emerson and how he talks about kind of fading away. It's like, he's talking about bankruptcy. He says, how did it happen? And he said 2 ways. First, it happened gradually. Then it happened suddenly.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
And I think that's kind of what it is with civilizations, is you don't know what you got. And then all of a sudden you're like, oh, this is unsustainable. Mm-hmm. We have an unsustainable birth rate. We have an unsustainable level of debt. Both of these things point to the valuing of a society that says, I'm just going to live for the moment. I'm not going to build for the future in any sort of real way. And I think it is kind of indicative of the kind of moment we're at. Here's the other thing, though, about Sorokin, because I think about Sorokin a lot, and I think you were the first one to introduce me to Sorokin and what he talked about. And I've thought about this in terms of when I started teaching and thinking and writing about worldview, it was all really theoretical, Right. Like we would talk about things like, if there is no God, then there's no source of meaning, right? And it was a theoretical line. I just saw a kind of an original line from Francis Schaeffer where he said that. And, it was all very theoretical. Well, fast forward to today, and like literally people think there is no meaning. It's not that they disagree on what the meaning is. They think there's no meaning to be had, and they're living life as one who would live it if there is no ultimate meaning. Mm-hmm. Or, we talked about postmodernism and said things like, well, everyone determines their own truth and their own understanding of reality. Up can mean down, and light can mean dark, and right can mean wrong, and stop can mean go, and boy can mean girl.
Right.
And then you realize, one of those has been debated in Congress, mm-hmm. right? And the boy means girl. In other words, I think that one of the realities of this civilizational moment is that there was a lot of theoreticals, and they were exactly right, but now they're actuals. That the parable of the madman, for example, from Friedrich Nietzsche, where he goes on this rant about all the implications if we get rid of God in our society. And then at the end, he goes, yeah, I'm too soon. It's coming, but it's coming in the future. I think we're in the future. Like, I think what Oz is pointing at is like, this is real stuff right now. People saw it coming and they were right, the Schaeffers and the Colsons and so on. But now we are really here.
People who are pilots stay focused on the horizon.
Right.
And there is a horizon that you can see, even if it's a cloudy day, you can look down at your instruments and your gyroscope will show you what is horizontal. If you don't know what is horizontal, then you can't know what's vertical. Mm-hmm. And airplanes that get in that situation always enter a death spiral. Mm-hmm. So I wonder sometimes if we may be losing that sense of the horizon. This is what Nietzsche was talking about. Even people who thought he was terribly wrong in the way he approached philosophy admire the fact that he was quite honest about the implications of where his philosophy would lead. Essentially, he was saying, look, if there is no God, and I don't think there is anymore because nobody believes in him, and it was only ever our belief in God that was important to begin with, then we have no horizon. What's up or down? Mm-hmm. What's forward or backward? None of these things mean anything anymore. But the thing I love about Truth Rising, I guess just to begin with the title, there's a hopefulness to it. Mm-hmm. I would say there's probably no end to the number of programs that have been put together saying we're doomed. Like everybody says we're doomed.
Right.
And climate.
You can sell a lot more books by saying you're
Oh, my
doomed.
goodness.
Yeah, you don't sell books or movies or whatever by saying everything's great.
Right. Yeah. Well, climate isn't, an illustration because we were looking at this a year or two ago. We found this study of sixth graders and 53% of them said they thought the world is going to end during their lifetime because of climate change. Entirely aside from our responsibilities to the environment, it is wrong to terrify children, right? And that climate alarmism got to the point where people were like, you know what? I can't be terrified of this anymore. My anxiety has worn me out. I've got nothing left to give to this cause. And then people start backing away often from a cause like that.
Yeah.
Do you think that it is possible that this kind of vacuum that is created, that truth could rise? And then what would have to happen for that to take place? It's a huge question.
Yeah, it is. And so I'll hit it on a couple levels. First is just in the creation of the project itself. When we started it and when we finished it, there was more time between those two moments than we had hoped. Let's just put it that way. In other words, but it's interesting because
as says everybody who's ever done anything, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, they call it a false start. I mean, this was a project that the Colson Center did with Focus on the Family and then Oz. And, when we started the idea of it, I mean, really the top spiritual headline of the world was the rise of the nuns, right? The 20-somethings who, were giving up on religion and becoming more and more and more and more secular. And the film is released, X number of years later, and I won't tell you what value is X for the sake of how long it took. But now we're talking about the quiet revival in Britain and whether there's a revival or not in the United States. And I know the numbers right now are all over the place on that, especially with young men and all that. And so we're still trying to figure out what happened, but it is a different moment. At the time we thought the lie about what it means to be human, male and female, that called, the transgender lie was going to run over every aspect of culture. And now we've seen brakes put on that. We've seen backpedaling away from the cliff. We've seen a vibe shift, whatever that means. So it is interesting to me how the Lord orchestrates this timing just to how people hear the title Truth Rising. And whereas we begin the film by talking about these serious things, we end the film by talking about stories of Christians who lived courageously on the truth and made an incredible difference against all odds. Now, it's hard to go back and tell a real live version of the restoration of a civilization because civilizations are in museums today,
right?
But you know what I can tell you, and we have more stories to be told in the study and beyond, is that I can point to an awful lot of agents of renewal, agents of cultural restoration. I can point to Jack Phillips, who 13 years ago was put on this journey against his will to bake this cake for this brand new idea in human history called same-sex marriage. And, we've had multiple conversations about him. We've had multiple conversations probably with Jack like I have. You remember how many people were telling him just to bake the cake?
This is always the Christian response to something is cave.
Yeah, cave.
Yeah, cave.
And I mean the Christians that were saying bake the cake. But he didn't. 13 years later, people have come to Christ. The freedom of speech has been restored. The whole narrative on him has changed, even from people who were hostile to him at the beginning. Had he just baked the cake, we would have never known his name.
That's right.
Did he know that? Did he plan that? Heck no. Would he have jumped in at that point, knowing what he knows now? I don't want to speak on his behalf, but it was 13 hard years.
Yeah.
But this is what we believe, and this is one of the things that we really try to pull out in the study that follows the documentary, that this cultural moment and the civilizational moment that we're in right now is real, it's serious, it's intense, but it's a moment. As Christians, we know there's a bigger story.
Yeah.
And our moment makes sense out of the story. We don't determine where the story's headed because of the chaos of the moment. That's the Christian worldview gives you from the heavens and earth to the new heavens, from the beginning to the end.
That's great.
And that is, you can see when that's lived out in a life. the difference that it can make. We tell Seth Dillon's story, The Babylon Bee. Ayaan Hirsi Ali, that's one I'd love to talk a little bit more about, because what a remarkable story she is right now.
Yeah, Chloe Cole,
and Katie Faust. And listen, they point to where hope is found, right? Our hope is in Christ. And because our hope is in Christ and his resurrection, a hopeful life is what we've been called to live. So the math of the project is simple. We live in a crazy moment, a civilizational level moment, and we're here not by accident. We're here because God wants us here. So that means we're actually called to this moment. How are we going to live? And that's what the project is supposed to answer. And the answer to that question, how then or how now shall we live, is hope. Is to be an agent of restoration, to be courageous, to be a truth teller, and believing that God will bring about the results he wants to bring as we are obedient and faithful, knowing that we're on the right side of history because we're on the right side of him.
Yeah. I think a lot of people who are watching or listening to the show right now know Jack Phillips. They know his story. He's a friend of yours and a friend of Colson Center. He's a friend of mine, friend of Summit Ministries. His consistency, his chill, it's really hard to believe, but that's the real Jack Phillips. Like, what he really wants to do when he's at your event is get off the stage, go home, and make cakes.
Yeah, no, that's right. That's right.
It's exactly the way. That's the way he really is. And if you go up to see him at his store, that's exactly the way he is. You know, what can I get you? Like, he's not a celebrity in his store. He's a guy who has cakes, and he just maintained that consistency through time. Yeah. It wasn't this shooting star that eventually fades out. He just stayed faithful. A lot of people have heard his story, but not so many are familiar with the journey of Ayaan Hirsi Ali. In the last 3 years have been an extraordinary journey for her. So tell us.
Well, I want to tell it in the context of the project, because that's what's so remarkable to me. So as the project continued to start and stop and evolve and revolve and evolve and change, Oz started to provide leadership to the Alliance for Responsible Citizens, which is a group out of London of international leaders trying to basically bring about the restoration of the ideas that built the world the way that it is, and the good ideas and so on. And I was there at the first conference there when Ayaan Hirsi Ali, who was known at the time for her deep commitment to atheism, basically a collaborator with the group we called the New Atheists. You remember those folks back in the 90s and 2000s that said God's a delusion and religion's a poison and everything else. And she basically made a case for, at the time, it sounded like cultural Christianity. She called herself a Judeo-Christian. And I remember 1,000 people in the room gasped. And we were like, what does that mean?
That's huge.
It's huge.
That's huge.
And it was, if you think about the number of people who have come out since and said, yeah, I think cultural Christianity is good. And there's been a growing bunch of them, Brits. She was one of the first. And it was just an unexpected thing. Oz is on the stage with her and that sort of stuff. Okay, put that in the backdrop. We're working on this project. We're talking about the civilizational moment idea. We're going to Neil Ferguson, who literally wrote the book on civilizations, and some of these, David Berlinski, and some of them Christians, some of them non-Christians, to talk about the civilizational moment that we're in. And Ayaan was one of the ones we interviewed. And of course, her perspective is she grew up in a radical Muslim background, had to flee that, went to the Netherlands, became a parliamentarian there, became an outspoken critic of Islam, particularly the impact Islam was having in Europe with its immigration and not bringing its culture with us. She got in trouble from that. A fatwa was put against her. She ended up then going deeper into her new atheism and so on. So we're interviewing her, and she talks about this journey, and she says this thing. And it's in the film, you can see it, where she says, I have been looking for freedom. I didn't find it in Islam, and I didn't find it in atheism. But now I'm finally free. Wow. And she's in this church where we're filming this part of it, and her eyes light up, and it's not an act. And we start hearing, this isn't just an appeal to cultural Christianity for her. There's something deeply personal. Mm-hmm. So in other words, if you think about the Truth Rising documentary, the first half is on the civilizational stuff, and the second half is what it means to be a courageous voice of courage and how truth can change your life and so on and so on. And we had her pegged for the first half, and then she says this, and you think, we got to ask. And she told her personal story. And her personal story tells you something. I think each of the 5 stories of courage that are part of Truth Rising, people have said this to us too that have seen it, tell us something different about a life of truth. Jack Phillips, you stand on truth no matter what and leave the results up to God. There's different message from Chloe, different message from Katie. But Ian is that the truth about civilization is also the truth about your own heart, your own soul.
Wow.
And that's what's so wonderful when we remember as Christians that truth is not philosophical concepts. Truth is a person. Truth is a person who is in charge of the universe and is writing the redemptive story of history. And the story of history is the truth about the story of history is the truth about our own stories. And this idea that Christianity is personal but not private. It's public, but it's also personal. You don't have that in Islam. You don't have that in secularism.
Great point.
It is brilliant. And to see a life transformed, a miracle happen, which is, I don't want to give too much away, but that's the story she tells. It's absolutely remarkable. And this is one of the smartest people on the planet. There's also that benefit where, she is such a voice of calm and wisdom and so important right now. And you just remember Elijah after Mount Carmel, and he complained to God, I'm the only one. And God's like, you're not the only one. You don't know where I'm working. Mm-hmm. And that is for all of those, to your question earlier, who have given up hope, who are tempted by despair. You don't have any idea how God's working in the history of the world. He is, and we get to be a part of that.
I want to hear a little bit of Chloe's story as well. And I hope we're building a sense of anticipation for people who are watching or listening right now, because this it's a film, it's a study, it's a course. Mm-hmm. It's all of these things. You can be used in a bunch of different ways, and hundreds of thousands, over 1 million viewers now probably.
We think, yeah.
Because of the people who are doing this as study groups, 1 million people who've absorbed this. And it's a lot. It's not just like watching a 25-minute, show on TV with 4 minutes of commercials. Mm. You got to commit to it, but you'll want to commit to it as you dig into it. And one of the things you often say to the students when you come and speak at Summit Ministries is, look, no matter what happens, we are living in a world in which Jesus Christ is risen from the dead.
Yeah.
That perspective energizes the students. They get very excited. I think there are some who look back and say, if only I had not made irreversible mistakes, then that might be true for me. So into this film comes a young woman, Chloe Cole. Tell us about that.
Chloe was deceived by one of the great lies of our generation, that you can be born into the wrong body. She believed it so much at such a young age, was lied to by so many people. She talks about the power and importance of social media and pushing that lie into her head, that she had a double mastectomy at age 15. And it's interesting because when we talk about truth, so many things, so many times, especially in areas of sexuality, we're told, those are your religious beliefs, those are your religious beliefs, those are your religious beliefs. Chloe is a detransitioner. She has come to embrace the truth about who she is. But she didn't do that because she became a Christian. She became a Christian because she embraced the truth about who she was. And this is what we mean. You remember Chuck Colson's old raspy voice going, true truth. It's not just, it's true. And what he meant was he was talking against this lie, which is It's true for you, but not for me. It's true for Christians. It's religious, but not scientific. It's facts, but not values, or values, but not facts, or whatever. And what he was talking about is, no, if it's true, it's true. It's the way the world is. In our Truth Rising study, one of the points we're trying to make is that Christianity offers the truth about reality. And you can sum up that truth in creation, fall, redemption, restoration. A lot of people have heard that. I think creation, fall, redemption and restoration are an incredible way to describe the fundamental message of the Bible. But even more than that, I think creation, fall, redemption, restoration is the best way to describe reality.
Right.
The Bible describes reality. And Chloe's story points to that. And again, I never want to give away too much. In the documentary, we have a 5-minute version of her story. In the study, we have a full 20-minute version of her story. And it's incredible. It's wonderful.
Well, I know people need to hear this because detransitioners right now, it's very difficult for them.
It is.
Because they're being told
they're hated by everyone.
Yeah. You don't you don't exist as a person. It's literally an attempt to deny their personhood so that their message does not get out.
That's right.
In the transgender ideology.
Look, Chloe talks about reading in a biology class a section about breastfeeding and realizing, what have I done? And there were these other moments to her story as well where she was confronted with reality. What's amazing about her story is that she started to detransition. And I don't want to say too much, but I remember hearing about Chloe a long time ago. I remember hearing about her and her story and so on. And she was where you would think somebody would be who was a young girl, barely, I think at the time in her 20s, and had just come to realize she'd made a horrible, horrible mistake and trying to come to grips with all the people that lied to her and whether she's worth anything now or has she permanently damaged everything. And to watch her tell her story of coming to Christ and how those final pieces came together and her worth and her value and her joy and her creativity and her purpose. The story of reality is the story of redemption and renewal.
Yeah.
At the center of reality is the resurrection of Christ. And the resurrection of Christ makes out all things new. If anyone's in Christ, he's a new creation. We read that in Paul. And then in Revelation, we hear the words of Jesus saying, behold, I'm making all things new. This is the story of the world. It's the renewal of things. It's the redemption of things. It's the reconciliation. All those wonderful, wonderful rewords. That is the story of the world. And because the truth of reality is the truth of us, then redemption is the story of us as much as it's the story of reality. And Chloe's story points to that. I love the fact that it was the truth about who she was that continued to point her to the truth that there was someone who made her.
Yeah.
And you just think, now, here's the other thing. As we're trying to answer this question in the study and in the film, how now shall we live, how, so on. You remember all the people that have told us you have to downplay that stuff because it'll get in the way of the gospel? Right, you remember? I mean, listen, yeah. We've had this conversation with kids and we were told by people in the center, Christian center, the center left, that God whispers about sexual stuff, that if we bring too much attention to that, we're going to get in the way. Think about, had Chloe not confronted the truth about who she was, if she had not found repentance, right? She would be left in her sin. And I think about the Jack Phillips story, about how many people said, just bake the cake. And I think about Chloe's story and how many people told anybody who was talking out loud from a Christian perspective about sex or about gender or anything, don't do that because you're getting in the way of the gospel. You're going to distract people from what they really need to hear and so on. She needed to hear the truth about who she was so that she could find the truth about the one who made her the way she was.
Right.
And we've gotten this whole thing backwards.
Yeah, totally agree. And just at a very practical level, for those who are watching or listening, if you're part of a church where tough things don't get brought up, let me tell you just something right now. If tough things are not being brought up, then the young adults in your church believe that Jesus doesn't care about tough things or that Jesus doesn't speak to tough things. The young adults who are coming back to churches now in the wake of the assassination of Charlie Kirk, which is a real trend, they are not coming back because they want their feelings to be massaged.
Right.
They're coming back because they need to be shown there are no irretrievable mistakes in your life. that God's plan for redemption through Jesus Christ, his plan A, is for exactly these kinds of situations.
Yeah, no, it's exactly right. And honestly, there was remnants of that trend or beginnings of that trend prior to the assassination of Charlie Kirk. And God has used this incredible life in order to pour fire and bring a lot more people to it. But I also see at the same time this kind of rise of alternatives. It's kind of Jesus's parable when you cast the demon out, 7 more come back and, Lewis, I think, also talks about when you open the door to the supernatural, a whole lot of things can be available. And if the churches aren't ready to have the conversations with the young adults and especially the young men that the young men want to have and the questions they want to ask, then they're going to look for the answers from other places, and we're already seeing that as well.
And there will be a lot of those. There's a pagan threat thread that runs through this. Cults rise in exact situations like this. The Jesus Revolution in the 1960s and 1970s yielded an enormous cult influence. Mm-hmm. You also have people who are social media influencers who take your desire to understand the mystery of the gospel and hijack it through conspiracy thinking.
Right. Yeah.
Right. And that's also a path. So all of those things kind of grow along with it.
No, it is. Yeah. I mean, and so you see kind of the rise of what people have called the woke right, which is basically just the same rules, right? Which is the problem with the world is that group of people over there. We're the good guys, they're the bad guys. And so you miss the creation story that all people are made in the image of God, and the fall part of the story, which says that the line between good and evil runs right down the middle of every human heart. And you start, if you don't start with those assumptions, you can end up with all kinds of counter explanations. And most of the time it ends up grouping certain people and calling them the enemy. And when you have an outraged population already, or a frustrated or annoyed population already, which you have with young people who feel they've been lied to, who feel that they haven't been taken seriously, who feel that they've been told that they're the problem with the world, and no matter what they do, they're toxic and so on. I think that's especially true for young men. They're going to look for people who treat them like the victims and who point out the bad people that are the cause of all their misery. And the gospel is a different message than that. Yeah. But the gospel is big enough for those concerns, and the gospel is big enough to speak to all those areas of life. So I think what you said earlier was absolutely important, and it should shape our mission, and it's exactly how we want Truth Rising to land in church communities. We've got hundreds of churches doing studies through this right now, and that's one of the big punchlines is what kind of church you're going to be. If you are a church that's silent on these issues, you've convinced your church members the Bible has nothing to say about these things.
Right.
But there's a whole lot of other people obviously ready and willing to have that conversation, and we're going to miss an incredible opportunity.
That's right. And for pastors a lot of pastors are getting told these days, oh, you gotta speak up on these issues. And man, they load up the cannon with every bit of gunpowder that they can and every sharp object that they can, and they just aim it at the congregation and light the fuse and just blow it all out there at one time. And everybody leaves disoriented and confused and scared and mad. But if with a resource like Truth Rising, you build the foundation, so that when it comes time to tackle issues that are going to be divisive, you already know how to have the conversation from a biblical worldview.
And you got to begin with what's true. And really, the 4 components of the study are really simple. I mean, I laugh when I'm talking to you about it because, we've gone through about every worldview program and book and study, and you've written, 3 books about it and all that sort of stuff. So we're really trying to make it as clear and practical as possible. But it's essentially this: what is true about reality? That's what we mean by truth. That's one of the pillars. The other one is hope, because that's what's true about this moment. Right? What's true about the reality is that it's a story that God is writing from beginning to end. What's true about this moment is that it's a hopeful moment, not a despairing moment because of Christ who's risen from the dead. What's true about the human person? Identity. And then how should we live? That's the calling. So it's 4 parts: hope, truth, identity, calling. Hope, truth, identity, calling. And how those things interact with each other. And every component has a teaching, and every component has a story. Because we believe that this stuff has to be lived out. It has to be embodied. And God has graciously given us some wonderful examples of people who are stories of truth, like Jack, and stories of hope, like Ian, and stories of coming to a grips with your identity, like Chloe, and a story of calling, which is a different story. It's a personal story of mine, of someone who made an incredible difference in my life unexpectedly. And letting that then be the fodder for answering that question. Okay, why has God put us in this moment? What does it look like for us to be truth tellers? What does it look like for us to be agents of renewal here and now?
Yeah. This is also good. There's so many ways that you can use this. Churches have life groups. Some have Sunday school classes. Some have Wednesday evening classes. Some would start a class for this just for a short period of time so that they can gather everybody together and not make them feel like this has to go on for the rest of your life. It's just, it's going to be a few weeks.
Right.
I was hosting an event recently, and one of the camera operators came up and said, "Hey, can I talk to you for a minute? I have 60 to 70 20-somethings who are coming over to my house every week. You know,
Amazing.
what can I do? How can I teach them?" Well, this would be a resource for something like that. Fascinating. The very next day, one of my co-hosts on the show said, "Hey, I was late getting here to this event because I have 60 to 70 young adults coming over to my house." I was like, you and the camera operator need to talk and kind of come up with a strategy. But that would be an example.
Yeah.
Like you could just make your home center of it. And more, you can also say, look, you might not end up agreeing with what you're hearing here, but wouldn't it be nice to be around some people who are really thinking about stuff that really matters? And then let's make a group like that.
Yeah, that's right. And it's designed with shorter teaching and a lot of discussion in order to facilitate that sort of conversation. And we've got Colson Fellows, folks that have been through our programs that are leading groups just like that, small groups with college students or with young adults or with young couples. And it's really fun to see this thing go because our prayer is that it's not just here's another class that you go through and learn some stuff, but that this really lands you in that place of calling. How are we going to be the agents of renewal that God has put us here to be in this civilizational moment?
Anybody who wasn't driving while they were listening to this has probably already Googled Truth Rising, so you already know where you're going to get the information. For those who were behind the wheel while they were listening to this, when they get home, they get on their computer, where are they going to go? Yeah,
truthrising.com. And there you have access to the documentary. We're sharing it for free. That was a commitment that Focus wanted to make, and Focus on the Family and the Colson Center wanted to make. And so you can have a version there that you can do a public showing of or a private showing of. And then you can also access the study that goes along with that as well. And that's 4 parts, 8 lessons. Two lessons per part through hope, truth, identity, and calling.
I have a feeling some people are going to say, we are going to do it, but we also want somebody like you or some of the other people we saw on the screen to come to our place, to come to our event, to our church. Are you doing events as well?
We have done some watch parties at various colleges, Cornerstone University. There's been some. We're doing, there's one up in Colorado Christian University here. We've had churches. A fun event that we did in Fort Worth with a wonderful church down there, Birchman Baptist, and a number of others. My church has done it. I just heard of another church here in Colorado Springs going to take their whole church through it, which is a lot of fun. So there's only one of me, and I have kids. So I'm
not trying to bump your freaking flyer status. I'm just curious because I know people are going to be asking.
We do have some folks that will go, but it really is designed that it can be led by facilitation. So hopefully the resources are there to get it done.
Yeah. Well, that's one thing that Colson Center has done really well. You and I probably on the show talked about Colson Fellows before, but that is a way where your team reproduces itself by training other people who can in turn be trainers. We do a lot of that work here at Summit Ministries as well. That's the way. That's the Jesus way. That's how he did it, and that's how things really grow. Well, let's just join in prayer, and that this is going to really rise in people's hearts, because this is the sort of the punchline. I know we ended up going longer than we thought we might, but Peter from Sorokin, when he looked at the history of civilizations, said there are times where a civilization collapses, it loses its creative energy and it collapses. But there are times when it moves into an ideational phase that renews a civilization based on true principles. But the tricky thing is the transition between the two is almost always horrible.
Yeah.
Horrible.
Yeah, and that's the revolution thing that we see, right? And one of the interesting parts of the film, and I know we're near the end of our time here, but you talk about unique people putting where God wants them to be. Oz lived through that. I mean, he is himself an expert on this, but his own personal story of seeing one of those revolutions
growing up in China during the revolution,
incredible. Siblings
being dying.
Right.
Yes.
I mean, hundreds of thousands when you see this, and then to see how God orchestrated all of this to bring his life and clarify his calling in the midst of all that. It's stunning.
Yeah. Well, be brave, be strong, because this truth of Jesus is the truth that changes everything. John, thanks for being on the show today.
Al, thanks so much.
Thank you to my guest, John Stonestreet, for coming on the show today. You can go to colsoncenter.org to find more of their resources. And you may remember from the show, John said the Truth Rising program, film, and course is free to the public, but you need to go to truthrising.com to get more information. This podcast is a resource of Summit Ministries. At Summit, we come alongside the rising generation and their trainers, parents, and influencers so that young people may know God's truth and become champions of a biblical worldview. Summer programs are coming up. If you want to get information about how to get 16 to 22-year-olds in that program, or you're just curious about an issue or something like that, and our parenting resources can help, all of that, just go to summit.org. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week.